Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing Tar. Tar stars Cate Blanchett as Lydia Tar, a renowned classical conductor whose world begins to unravel as she embarks on Mahler's Fifth Symphony. Tar is directed by Todd in his first feature film in 16 years, with supporting performances from Mark Strong and Nina Haas. I should say that maybe we could call this like a spoiler review. I don't know if this is a movie you can really spoil, but we're gonna go into some details that maybe happen later in the film that if you wanna see this, maybe you should check out the film first. So Matt, what did you think of Tar?
As a whole, I would say I really like Tar. I do think there is an immense amount of craft happening here in this film, from the directing to the acting to the cinematography. It's almost like perfection what's happening on screen. I do think there are times in which I feel separated from the film because it is so highbrow. It is very dense, the dialogue. There's a lot of things that just pass kind of right over my head because I can't make sense of certain vernacular in terms of symphonies and orchestras. Other than that, I really did enjoy this movie to the extent of which I could. I think the bright spot, the shining diamond in this movie is that of Cate Blanchett, because she is absolutely fantastic in this movie. I could not talk more about how great she is in this movie. The way she moves from line to line to line with such control and conviction, the way she moves from English to German to English, like she's been doing it since she was born. The way tonally she changes through her dialogue from the bombastic to the restrained. It's almost that she sinks so deeply into this role that Cate Blanchett, the actress, just doesn't exist. I did not see one iota of her on screen as her, the actress. She disappeared into this role. She was absolutely fantastic. I think the talent that she portrayed in this film is absolutely immeasurable, and that's what I have to say about her.
The only word I could think of to describe her is embodiment. So this film starts with an extended interview with the New Yorker's Adam Gopnik, who's a real person, by the way, who's really very interesting. And she, from that first moment, absolutely feels like a real person doing a real interview that you would see on 60 Minutes or Charlie Rose or what have you. She is the absolute embodiment of this character, and I'm really stunned by her performance. I think the writing demands a lot of her. There's a lot of subtleties in this film that we'll get into. There are times that she is being sincere. There's times that she's being very manipulative. There's times where she's flat out lying. It's almost just off screen that she's lying, that you have to really pay attention in order to even perceive it and say, wait, why is she lying? What does this have to do with her psychology?
The way her character lies with such ease that it almost...
Complete ease.
Yeah, it's very creepily done in a way. I could think of this particularly the way she's dealing with her wife. She comes back from this first trip that she's on at the beginning of the film. It's one of these instances where she did not respond to any of the calls that her wife had left her. But when she gets home, she has such warmth about her. Though just like a few minutes before, we learn she did a little bit sideswiping of her wife's medication, which was a very interesting scene.
I know, I had that written down too. Yeah, that was the first scene in the movie that was like, my interest was really piqued. I'm like, what is going on here? The persona of Lydia Tar is so purposely calculated in the film. Meaning not only is the director and Cate Blanchett purposely calculating this character, but the character themselves is purposely calculated. We see her, and you kind of alluded to this, we see her go from extremely brash to extraordinarily smart and academic to almost charming and warm, that you get this sense that you're not really sure who the real Lydia Tar is. So to watch this film, you're in this constant state of interpretation. The film really doesn't guide you anywhere. You were talking about that medication scene earlier. That's a scene that just happens, and Lydia just lies, and we don't know why. The film has a tremendous amount of trust in your intelligence, and as somebody who really doesn't like being talked down to, who really enjoys academia, who really enjoys extremely dense, intellectually driven dialogue, who really enjoys a cold, detached filming style, I actually found all of those things to be done in almost excess in this film that I even had trouble penetrating it. And this is the stuff that I live for. And I very much like the film. I actually love the film. There's actually a scene towards the end where Lydia goes to get a massage and she leaves and throws up in the street. And somebody audibly said in our theater, "I don't get it." And I think that there's going to be a lot of that with this film, because there's a lot of scenes that are put in there for you to kind of wrap together and make your own interpretation. And the film is not spelling it out for you.
Yeah, and as I was alluding to earlier, there's this dialogue and this vernacular about symphonies and orchestras that just went right over my head.
Yeah, me too.
And there are plenty of scenes that go on for minutes and minutes where she's having like a lunch date with somebody and they're just talking about the craft in a way that is very sincere. And I felt those scenes, but I didn't understand them. Mm-hmm. And so that led me to feel separated from the film. But on the other end, there's these wonderful scenes just about her character in general that are so under the surface, but say so much about her character. One of them in general I could think of that is connecting a little bit with what you were talking about earlier. She is modeling and getting prepared for her cover of her album that's coming out. And she's actually mimicking her clothing style and the cover, like the picture of a conductor that she really looks up to. So for me, it was like, who is Lydia Tarr? She's kind of formulating her own persona off her idols, which is something I think is a larger aspect of the film that we could get into at some point.
Oh, yeah.
There are instances over the course of this movie when she's watching these conductors back towards the end of the film and these little things of creating her cover. There are all these things that she's pulling from all her idols that she looks up to. And I'm looking for the ounce of originality in her, because it's almost like she's taking everything from other people and building her own persona off of it.
Her hero in this film is Leonard Bernstein. There's an amazing scene towards the end where she watches a video of Leonard Bernstein, and he talks about how powerful music is and how it's this emotion that you just simply can't calculate. And she cries. I think it's the only time she cries in the film. And I can't help but wonder if she's crying in that moment because her life is so calculated, because she really missed what the overwhelming emotion of the music is.
The way she conducts people and tells them what they need to change and adjust to make it something that's special and unique in a certain regard is very well done, and it's displayed to us on screen. So that's not to say that she's not talented.
She would be kind of like what Harold Bloom would call the anatomy of influence, like she's a conglomeration of all of these different influences. I think this film becomes this really interesting endeavor about what happens when the persona, the calculated, made-up persona that you made for yourself starts to crack. And what is your life like? Because we see Lydia go from extreme egotism and extraordinary control to absolute desperation. There's some scenes towards the end of this movie where she is fanatically desperate to maintain the control and the power that she once had.
Yeah, and I think that all comes down to one of the biggest concepts in this movie is cancel culture. It's a big theme of this movie is how she deals with a lot of the ways in which she treats people being leaked to the world.
There's a lot of really interesting scenes in this movie because when she is accused, she is the first person to call the victim, say, oh, this is just a rogue weirdo. She had a lot of problems. We can't really take her credibility seriously.
She wasn't one of us.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of these things that I think are almost directly taken from headlines, directly taken from press statements of people that have been accused. But then there's this really interesting scene towards the end where she's in a basement and she sees a man and she runs and ends up falling and injuring her face. And she tells everybody that she was attacked, but she wasn't attacked. So we see her commandeer this victimhood attitude when it most suits her. But then when she's being accused, she's not at all interested in victimhood. She's not at all interested in the self-reflection that comes with it. So we see her argue both sides of cancel culture at different times whenever it suits her, which I think goes to how manipulative she is as a person. This film is not didactic at all. This film is not here to preach a philosophy. This film is wrestling and almost reckoning with all of these different ideas with a tremendous amount of nuance. There's a lot of films about cancel culture that have been made that I think have very clear boundaries and very clear morals. And to be clear, there's a lot about people that have been canceled that the morals are pretty clear. The morals about Harvey Weinstein are very clear. Frankly, there are other times where they're not so clear and they are ambiguous. And I think this film is really engaging with that ambiguity in a way that is just utterly fascinating. And I could see it. If the film wasn't so restrained, I can almost see it as button pushing, but I don't think it's trying to do that at all.
No, I think it's more of a piece on human behavior and how we act in extreme situations where we have everything we could ever want. And what happens when that's taken away? What happens with just natural human behavior? we get defensive, we act out. You know, there's certain ways in which humanity reacts to certain situations that maybe people could relate to in themselves, even if not necessarily exactly what Lydia Tarr is going through, because she's kind of an extreme circumstance here.
Yeah. But it does make us, I think, a compelling case that grooming, even predatory behavior, certainly preferential treatment, is rampant in academia. And I think the film makes a very good case for that.
That's one of the things I did not know that much about in this film that I was educated on, was the politics of being in an orchestra. There's these wonderful scenes where Lydia is, well, not wonderful, they're harrowing, but she's basically starting to groom this new girl that she sees that plays the cello, to the point of which she gives her a solo over the person who's been celloing in this orchestra for probably decades.
By the way, did you hear me in the theater when she asked about auditions and I said, oh my God?
You had like an audible gasp. Because it was the way that's revealed to you. She brings it up in front of the entire orchestra that this thing is going to go to an audition.
And typically, I guess it would go to the first chair, so this is really unconventional. But she makes it sound like she's trying to make it work for everybody else, but it's really she's trying to fulfill her own needs of propping up this person.
But this is one of the instances in which the film itself did such a wonderful job of bringing you to a world that you may not know very much about educationally.
It's extremely well researched. So I have a couple other character details I want to go over, and again, these are kind of spoilery. Towards the end of the film, she goes to what is presumably her brother's house. He says, oh, Linda, I thought you would be here. Oh, sorry, I should call you Lydia. That's amazing. That is an amazing little thing, because clearly her given name is Linda, and at some point she made a very calculated move to change this to Lydia. That has a very different type of connotation than Linda would have. Linda is very conventionally American. Lydia is very highbrow. So I thought that was fascinating. I mean, as the movie begins to unravel, as Lydia begins to unravel in the second half, I thought that was one of the more interesting details.
I think that's such an amazing point that you make, because to me, I think that can also say as much of it as it does about her character, but the impact that shows that maybe the culture has and the profession has on people in it. The presumption of being highbrow and highly intellectual, and the dichotomy, oh my gosh, this is all coming together for me in a way. The dichotomy of the new girl that she's trying to groom.
Yes, 100%.
She is not highbrow at all. She's like free living.
She learned how to play cello on YouTube.
On YouTube. That comes, oh my God, the details.
Yeah, no, this film is very detailed.
Everything that Lydia has raised herself to be to fit inside this mold of this culture. Oh my gosh.
I want to talk about, no, that was a very good point. I want to talk about some of the technical aspects, because the set design in this movie is amazing. So think about when she's Lydia, she's in this like Armageddon bunker of a house that she lives in, this apartment with all these books and all the piano and everything, right? But then when she returns to her house with her brother, what do we see? We see old lamps, we see wood paneling.
The metals on the wall.
Yeah, there is so much attention to detail in this film. Todd Field hasn't made a film in 16 years. He's had some unrealized projects, but he was clearly like mulling over this project for an extraordinarily long time. And it really shows on screen. It looks like 16 years worth of work in the details.
There's this beautiful, wonderful scene, also insanely crazy scene that happens when she's teaching at Juilliard.
I just want to say this is probably my favorite scene of the year so far.
I completely agree. And this scene is one shot and it moves its way around the room. It has almost like, what seems like 10 minutes of dialogue.
It must be 10 plus minutes. Yeah.
I think the context in which this scene has by the end of the film is just as important as the context it has in the moment that we see it. The guy in class is challenging her belief system of almost what she was molded into be.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse for her behavior, of course. There's no excuse for the way she treats people in this film. I think there's also something to say about the culture and the profession and people in the profession and how they force people, because she was turning into that person that was trying to force somebody new and upcoming to become a certain way. The whole wraparound is so cool to me.
She doesn't approach it as if, here's another perspective you haven't considered, let's have a conversation. She treats it as, let me eviscerate this student in front of everybody. And it's a slow progression, but again, she's a very methodical and very calculated person, and she knows where she's going. What is so interesting, and that scene is absolutely spellbinding in all ways, the way that Cate Blanchett performs it, the way that it's written, the way that it's shot. I actually didn't notice it was one shot for like 5 minutes because it's actually not very showboaty the way that it's one shot. But then when you start thinking about the logistics, you say, wait, how did they actually do this? What's really interesting is we were talking about cancel culture. The way that that video comes back at the end of the movie is so interesting because it willfully misrepresents her, even though the things she was saying are somewhat problematic to start with. But at the same time, the way that it's whittled down into like a TikTok video makes her look so much worse than that speech actually was, which is fascinating. Every opportunity that this film has to take a moral high ground, it just doesn't do it. It says, listen, I have no easy answers. I'm wrestling with these ideas as much as you are. You can be somebody who's extremely manipulative and still be misrepresented and still be sympathetic on some level. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, the more and more we talk about this, just the more I get a sense of the layers of this film, the nuance in this film, and the amount of little contextual things that are in this film about society and multiple different layers about cancel culture, the people who participate in it even, and to some degree, and her own problems and her own fixations and her own obsessions. I think there's just so much going on in this movie. And it all does come to a head right at the end, where we see Lydia in a very different place than we saw at the beginning of the film. So I'm totally interested in hearing your opinions on that.
So Lydia has clearly had a fall from grace at the end of this movie, right? And now Lydia is conducting something that's almost like a role-playing movie film type thing.
She's conducting an orchestral version of a film. So if you ever heard of like Harry Potter actually does these, is that they'll bring in an entire orchestra to play the score of Harry Potter while fans are watching the movie. This is exactly what she is doing at this point in time.
We're led to believe that this is a semi-reputable kind of orchestra. And then the screens come down, and it's this reveal that it's kind of more of almost like a festival attraction, Disney World kind of thing, because we see people dressed up in all these various costumes and etc. It was kind of funny, and then the film just ends. And again, I know I keep saying this, but I was in a constant state of interpretation during the film that you're taking in so much information and so much detail that I wasn't even thinking about how much I liked or didn't like the film at that point. And then when it ended, I said, I think I love this film. Endings are very important because I think that they really tell you what the movie is actually about. I think in the final couple minutes of a film, a director comes out and says, this is what I actually meant. So I'm forced to reckon with whatever this was about. It's a very strange way to end a film that's wrestling with so many ideas, and I actually completely missed the dialogue that was happening over this that you talked about with me in the car. I think this ending could be one giant elaborate joke that would be pretty hilarious, or like something that's pretty ironic, or it could be a simple, sad fall from grace. Or it could be another simple, this person is doing what they always wanted to do and screw everybody else. It's clearly not either of those things because this film doesn't operate on that level. It's somewhere in the middle with a bunch of nuance. But the ending is really fascinating, and I'm very eager to see the film again to interpret it again.
The way I built my interpretation off this was the dialogue in the movie in which she was conducting the score to, because it's very pronounced. In this flick, there's this very stereotypical dialogue that would take place on a battle scene. It's like, when you get down, don't pay attention to the people that put you down. You get right back up and you just keep going. And to me, it's almost as if it is a joke because she might be pulling on that to say, they all let me down, they all took me down, and I'm going to keep going.
And she clearly prefers her former life. There's not an indication of that, but who wouldn't?
Yeah.
You know?
But to me, I got the impression that her as a person didn't change at all throughout the course of this movie. And that she is just, they're going to kick me down and I'm going to keep going. And she's taking that mentality with her as justification for the way she treated people very poorly. What's funny is, coming out of the theater, I told myself, you know, I really like this film. I appreciated it, but I'm not sure I would watch it again. After discussing this film, I'd probably be more interested in watching it again.
Yeah.
It'd be very interested to see some of the beginning things again in context of knowing where she's going to end up.
I almost feel not qualified to give a review having seen this film once, because again, I think there were so many signals that you should be interpreting that I don't feel like I completely have a handle on yet. I think a second viewing of this film is really going to do wonders for both of us.
So you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I'm going to give this an A. I think this is a this is a very, very good film. There are times that I felt pretty cold towards this film, especially watching it. And I'm going to be really interested to watch it again. I think it could only raise in my estimation from watching it again. It is clearly so pained over that there is all of these details that really make sense with what the film is trying to say. This is really where I live in terms of filmmaking, that I just love the ambiguity. I love coming out of a film and saying, you know, having a great conversation about something and saying, what is this movie actually trying to say? You know, when you leave a movie that's outraged, it does have a certain effect, but it fades after a while. Whereas I think that this film will have things to talk about for a really long time, and an extraordinary Cate Blanchett performance. And we didn't even talk about the cinematography that much.
I was going to in just a second.
Yeah, this film is gorgeously staged from a photograph perspective, and just extraordinary.
I give this movie a B+. So I think where we
I want to hear the negatives. I didn't hear a lot of negatives when we were talking. I want to hear them.
I think the main one is me feeling separated from the movie because it is colder. I do think this film is really ambitious. I'm not sure it's doing anything entirely new with its idea. I've seen a couple think pieces on this of how it's transforming this concept and taking the concept of cancel culture and display in a way that I think is really accessible to people. And I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think A Hero is a wonderful example of a very accessible film to a whole general population.
Yeah, but people don't like reading subtitles.
I don't care.
I know, I agree.
But I think that film is just so much more accessible and dealing with these concepts in a way that's very similar to this film, but did it before it. So I kind of give it a little bit more credit in doing that in a way that I think is just so relatable, but also a little bit more endearing. I think that movie has a little bit more heart to it. Yeah, it's very humane. I do want to go back to the cinematography in a sense, because there was something that I do need to clarify in a second watch, but the impression that I got, one of the things I really loved about it is that her world is so big and so powerful. A lot of the shots that I sense from the beginning of the film are very wide. And I see as the doors are closing on her, it almost seems like the shots are getting smaller and smaller and closer and closer. And also more mobile. From a cinematography standpoint, that is so much of what cinematography is about, complementing the film and its emotions. And I think it just does a wonderful job of doing that. I love when films pay attention to that and how all these elements correspond with one another. If you love cinema, and if you love the very specific hallmark makings of cinema, like cinematography, the acting, if these things are very important to you, the directing, how all this comes together, I think this is a wonderful example, like a shining light in cinema in a certain regard.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think many films are made like this.
They're not.
And genuinely, I believe that. And the person behind us was wearing a Palme d'Or Cannes Film Festival 1984 shirt.
Oh, they were? I didn't even notice.
I don't think I'm a dumb person about movies, but I said to you, that movie was really intellectually demanding, and he was like, ugh. I'm like, are you that much smarter than me? Anyway, whatever. I hope that guy sees this video. Please comment, Mr. Cannes Film Festival 1984 Palme d'Or. I'm gonna look up what won the Palme d'Or in 1984 and see why you're wearing a t-shirt about it. And that's it for a review of Tar, which is now playing in theaters. Let us know in the comments, what did you think of Tar, and we will see you in the next one.